Great, thanks very much. You should, just looking at the photo, you'll notice that one of my eyes is bigger than the other. I hate that photo. And it's also like 5 years old, and I think I must have had a very good night out the night before. Which is a bit like yesterday. But anyway, what an absolute delight to be here today and to see people in person. I don't know about you, but I think, do you remember the film Shirley Valentine? She keeps on talking to the wall, doesn't she? And eventually it drives her mad. Well, it's what it's felt like for the last 2 years, talking to the wall or to a screen. And I actually suspect that we will find, not only for young people, but for quite a lot of the population, that there's been a bit of a mental health issue that has arisen simply from COVID itself, even for people who've not been ill, but just because of all that sense of isolation and being trapped in a room. So it is amazing to be here. Absolutely brilliant. I can't stay for the whole day, unfortunately. I have a meeting with Jacob Rees-Mogg at 11:30. I see you all want to come along as well. Well, I can sell you a ticket if you want for £112,000 a year. No, sorry, that was naughty. I'm not meant to make jokes like that. No, I mean, we're in a quagmire and we've got to march ourselves back out. And he marched us in, so I'm going to try and help us march our way back out. But that was just a means of my explaining why I've got to leave. I also don't want to alienate Conservative MPs at the moment, because one of the things I care about more than anything else is acquired brain injury. As I think you know, for several years now, I've chaired the group. It took us quite a while to get the group to happen. Some of the other members who were going to be members of it kept on getting promoted and made government ministers and things, so couldn't be part of the group. And so it's great that we exist, and we produced our report now several years ago, which is referred to all over the place. I was sitting at home last year thinking, well, what on earth can we do now? And then I came 10th in the ballot for private members' bills. And I thought, well, one of the things that is a real flaw in acquired brain injury and the way that we deal with this in the UK is, for a start, it's a hidden epidemic. So there's roughly 1.4 million, it may be more people who are affected. Lots of people have no idea that that is true because we don't know how the mind sits inside the brain, and lots of brain injuries wouldn't necessarily show themselves or be obvious to a person on the outside. The person standing in front of you at the queue may be slurring, and you may think, well, that's because they're drunk, and it has absolutely nothing to do with that. It's because they had a brain injury. So it's a much bigger issue than I think government has ever managed to admit. And secondly, it affects so many different departments. In the UK still, compared to other countries, including France and the United States of America, we don't do as well with army veterans or members of the armed forces when they're involved in an explosion. We don't standardly test for brain injury. The other countries do. Why don't we do that? It seems utterly preposterous. Likewise, we weren't doing that. We weren't standardly screening, and I don't necessarily mean an MRI scan or whatever. I mean just asking some basic questions, which would suggest whether we need to go for further screening. We don't even do that with women who've, been beaten by their husbands or have received repetitive blows from a partner. And then when you look at what happens in the prison service in the UK, we have now worked out, thanks to some great pioneering studies, that both in male prisons and female prisons, roughly 2/3 of prisoners coming in have had a significant brain injury before they came into prison, let alone what might then happen when they're in prison. So we are now screening them, which is brilliant. That's all part of the UKABIF campaign. We won that little battle. And that's excellent, because it means that, apart from anything else, as one governor said to me, you know what, the simplest thing we did was we worked out that some of the people who were really bad at timekeeping and therefore kept on getting into further trouble in the prison, and people who were most freaked out by loud noise down one end of the prison were people who'd had brain injuries. So just a simple adjustment was easy to make, and it improved the situation in the prison for all the prisoners, and in particular for those ones. So the prison service. In schools too, you'll all know this fact, but a child from a poorer background is 4 times more likely to have suffered a significant brain injury by the age of 5 and also in their teenage years than from a wealthier background. Now, we don't understand why all of that is. Is that about housing? Is that about childcare? You know, what are the causes behind that? But we do know that quite often what ends up happening is that everybody looks after the child if they've been involved in a car crash and they've had an obvious brain injury for a few months afterwards. But then a year later, when neurocognitive stall kicks in, or utter lassitude, complete fatigue, so that they're completely unable to concentrate or even get themselves out of bed, they're treated as if they're a naughty schoolboy or schoolgirl and end up being excluded from school, ended up in the criminal justice system and so on. Whereas if somebody had actually thought, let's connect all the dots here between all the different departments that deal with this child and make sure that we've got an ongoing pattern of care for them for several years after that brain injury, we might have been able to help them far more significantly. There are issues for the justice system, as I've already referred to, for the Home Office, for the Department for Education, obviously for the Health Department, because a quarter of it's great that the government has introduced all these major trauma centres up and down the country. They have undoubtedly saved more lives, and I have supported the government when they've had to close smaller A&Es that are local, because actually I would want to be taken to a major trauma centre rather than an A&E which maybe hadn't dealt with major trauma, certainly not brain injury, for several months. And we save more lives, but the difficulty is that a quarter of all major trauma centres still don't have a consultant neurorehabilitation specialist. So it means that quite often then the support that is necessary is there for a week, a month, 2 months, 3 months, whatever, when they're in hospital, but then when they go back home, the support falls off. And that's because there's not a connection between the local health service or between acute and community services, or between acute and local authority services. So out of all of this, what the conclusion I came to was it's blindingly obvious, we need a strategy. We need I don't know why nobody has ever thought of this before. Let's have a strategy. And then Dame Cheryl Gillan died, Conservative MP, who was a very, very naughty woman. But I used to get on with quite well because she had a very naughty sense of humour. She, in 2008, she said, I remember her saying in the chamber, and she was talking about autism, we should have a strategy. Let's have a strategy. Why don't we have a strategy? And she introduced a bill which became the Autism Act 2008, which did one thing only, which was it insisted that the government had to have a strategy for autism because it affected so many different departments. One thing, it had to have a strategy, it had to consult on that strategy, it had to keep it under review, and it had to publish it. So some of you are old enough to remember Tom Lehrer, who was an American comic musician, and he wrote lots of songs, including Poisoning Pigeons in the Park. It just takes... No, I'm not going to do that one. Because I'll get into trouble. But most importantly, he wrote the lines, plagiarise, 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 let no one else's work evade your eyes, so don't shade your eyes, but plagiarise, 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 always in the name of research. So I have basically plagiarised Cheryl Gillan's autism bill, which became the Autism Act, and we will have an acquired brain injury bill. Now, you may know that Parliament is a very strange Hogwarts place, and sometimes our procedures are very bizarre, and sometimes governments don't always do the right thing. And sometimes my favourite word in life is shenanigans. My least favourite word, you weren't asking, but it's moist. So they may engage in parliamentary shenanigans on the 3rd of December, which is when the bill comes before the House. And my bill is the second bill. They may try to talk the first one out so that they don't have to end up having a vote on my one, because they'll be embarrassed about saying, yes, We obviously know we've got to have a strategy, but we just don't want to have a strategy. So there may be parliamentary shenanigans on the 3rd of December, but the best way to avoid parliamentary shenanigans is for every single person in this room to do me a favour, which is to write to your MP. I know some of you may have done this already, but you might want to get everybody you also know to write to your MP to say, please, please, please support the bill, because it does such a simple single thing. It doesn't spend lots of money. It just says that the government's got to have a single strategy. I've met with Sajid Javid, and he said, you know what, we should have a strategy. And I said, well, that's good, because I've got a bill which says you've got to have a strategy. Oh, well, I don't want to have a strategy. I said, but then you won't have a strategy. Wouldn't it just be easier to have a strategy of having a strategy and supporting the bill which insists that you have to have a strategy, and then we'd all have a strategy? He went, well, you might say that. And I said, no, I have said it, in fact. So I think it's still uncertain what the government is going to do. The more you can twist the arms, obviously in a nice non-bullying, non-aggressive way, metaphorically and all, the more you can twist the arms of MPs, anybody you know, to persuade them that they should have a strategy. And not only that they should have a strategy, but that they should be required to have a strategy, so that they definitely will have a strategy, and that their strategy should be to have a strategy, the better. Well, now I've said the word strategy about 500 times. You know what's in the bill, don't you? There's a strategy. I'm happy to take questions. I don't think I've got anything grander or better or more insightful to say. I just want a strategy.
I don't know if this is... Is this working? Yeah, it is. Good. I don't know if well, I'm going to take Chair's prerogative and ask the first question at least. Chris, when we write to our MPs, as you have kindly helped us, we've got the ABI, I Back the ABI Bill webpage, and we've got the form letters.
Yeah.
What's your tip on form letters in terms of how they're handled by the MP's office? Because I've just got that sense that if lots of very similar letters arrive, people start sending form responses, and that may be an okay thing. It's sort of mass pressure, and it helps raise awareness of how many of us care about it. But I also have that sense that if we actually want engagement with it, we want to try and get them to answer. So, for example, my MP is Lucy Fraser. I don't anticipate her being incredibly helpful, but she does have a financial interest in it these days as what is she called? Secretary for...
When you say she's got a financial interest, I don't think you mean that she's paid for by
not that I'm aware of. I mean, no, she's the secretary, the financial secretary. So I kind of tried to shape my letter to say, Lucy, as you're now sitting in a treasury position, surely you should pay attention to this. So that's how I've done it. I don't know if that's the right approach, but I'd be really interested to hear your reflections on this issue.
So MPs, I've got lots of things going through my head now except MPs, but basically MPs respond best to personalised correspondence. When it's a campaign, they send it off to somebody in their office who deals with the campaign, and everybody will get the same answer. However, if you write in and say, my daughter had a car crash 3 years ago and she never had the support she needed, and if there were a national strategy, blah blah, or my father played rugby for years and years and now has terrible concussion and suffered lots of concussions and now suffers from early onset dementia, then I think that has far more effect on an MP. So the more you can make it personal, the better. And the more you can make it direct to that MP rather than generic. So we've done the bits that we need every MP to understand is that all I'm asking for is a so as long as you got that bit in, and I just want every MP to know that we want a strategy. But all the rest, you dress it up as, you know, you can tell your life. I wouldn't do your whole life story, but yes, on the whole, the more you customise it, the better.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Are there some more questions? Peter? Oh, sorry. We've got them on the screen. We're going to prioritise screen first.
Similar question, you've already commented on this, but would you suggest that any correspondence we have with our local MP about the bill just promotes the need for a formal strategy in place and the reasons why?
Correct. It got the word strategy in. I mean, the advantage of having a strategy, this is obvious, I know, but it means that all the departments then have to cooperate. Nobody can say no because it's a legal requirement. And the advantage of a strategy is that it isn't just a one-day, right, we're going to do, so it's not a tactic. It's not just what we're doing this year. It's what we're going to do over a series of years. And they have to consult, and that means that organisations like yourselves and so many other organisations can inform that strategy, and the strategy can develop over years. But it's got to be a strategy.
Thank you. I also think you've answered this question as well, but how do we ensure the MP gets and reads the letters? Mr O'Neill, for example, has a response, I don't respond to the campaign format letters. So you've just said personalise it.
Well, so the more you've personalised it and you put your name and address and you know, you start with the dear Mr Bryant, You won't know, but for the last 15 years I've been working as a nurse in, a rehabilitation unit or whatever, and blah, 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 blah. Or the more you do that, the better. It just makes it 10 times more difficult for them to send it to the Incidentally, I don't think any MP, I'll get into trouble now, I don't think any MP should be doing I don't reply to standardised letters. They are the bane of my life, I have to say, because what really winds me up is they'll have just clicked a link, and we're not doing that in this campaign. They just click a link, and suddenly I've got 200 emails saying blah, 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 blah about some issue, and then with those, I don't respond, a member of my team does, and then when I respond to them, they never come back and say thank you or whatever. It really winds me up.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. Saying thank you matters too.
Absolutely. Saying thank you matters, definitely.
Your humanity, the way that you've connected with us, I think it has really illustrated that you've become like a friend to us as a charity, as a community. And I think I've really struck when I've had a chance to meet the other MPs, despite how they're portrayed in the media, they are also humans that want to engage often.
Oh, look, the truth is that, and incidentally, it's one of the reasons I really care about the standard system. I honestly don't know an MP who didn't come into politics to change the world for the better, against their own version of how that should be. And I might passionately disagree with others. I mean, sometimes they do get a bit sort of stuck in a lay-by, is the politest way of putting it. And, you know, obviously I would disagree with lots of MPs, but in the end, the vast majority are there to do that. And they are utterly human. And in fact, I think lots of MPs have really struggled. There's a significant number of MPs at the moment who are having major mental health support.
Yeah, it's really important. Any more on screen? Peter had his hand up.
Yeah. I'm just going to ask if Chris might validate my strategy for getting a strategy, which next Monday we're going to deliver a letter at number 10 Downing Street. So I wrote to my MP saying, are we delivering a letter? Could I have a meeting? And I also contacted my local paper to say, I've asked my MP for a meeting to go with this letter that we're delivering. And I believe on December the 3rd there's a debate in Parliament. And we all have the right to say to our members of Parliament, I'd like to pop down and meet you. And even if they're too busy, we can always hang around outside Westminster. There's a lot of MPs hang around the Red Line, you never know who you bump into. But we can make a difference. You know, Chris is 10th in it. So that's my strategy. I've got my local paper asking my MP, Pete Freeman wants to meet you to talk about his daughter and the ABI bill. Will you be meeting him when he goes to number 10?
I thought I was going to sneeze, but then I wasn't. Sorry. I'm a bit lightheaded this morning. I think, yeah, no, perfect, absolutely perfect. That's the kind of stuff that MPs understand. And yes, it's good. We're going to Downing Street. Natasha in my office, incidentally, who's been absolutely wonderful and worked with the amazing, absolutely gorgeous, super wonderful Chloe. These are all, we're pulling out all the stops. Incidentally, the thing about a strategy is that sometimes the strategy has to be more than just trying to win a particular battle. It's possible that we won't win on the 3rd of December, but that doesn't mean that the strategy of getting a strategy is yet over. So we have to keep our sights on the distant horizon. Now I'm doing songs from the shows. We've got to keep our eyes on the distant horizon. And well, anyway. Yeah. So we might, yes, exactly. Well, there were two songs that were clashing in my head at the same time. But so the 3rd of December, we might not win. We shouldn't be downhearted if that's the case because of parliamentary shenanigans. We will still win in the end. There will be an Acquired Brain Injury Act. It's just when, not if.
Great. How are we doing? Well, just watching. We've got a couple of minutes, so we've got. I've got one. We've got 3 hands up, so let's see if we can fit in 3 questions. Mike.
Women, incidentally, are allowed to ask questions. Not all questions have to be asked by men.
No, Chris, I'm just wondering when one has an MP, as I have, currently a junior government minister, who even before that would send formulaic responses to individualised and personalised
Who is it?
requests. Joe Churchill.
Right. So Jo is a wonderful woman and is an ally in this. So my suggestion in relation to Jo, I can't do this for all 650 MPs, but my suggestion for Jo is you should ring her office and ask whether you can have a chat with her on the phone. Because my guess is that she, behind the scenes, is trying to get the government to say yes. So she might not be able to say that publicly because she's a government minister. But honestly, there's one of the difficult things this year for lots of MPs is that has been James Brokenshire dying of cancer, especially for those of us who've had late stage cancer. And Joe's been through the mill on that more than once. So we're all part of a kind of cancer survivors club in Parliament. And of course, you have survivor's guilt when somebody else dies and you're still there. It's empty chairs at empty tables, to go to Les Mis. But so Jo is, I'm personally very fond of Jo, and you should ring and ask whether you can have 5 minutes with her on the phone.
So that means, even though she hasn't replied yet to my letter proposing that she back the strategy,
Yeah.
then, I look forward to hearing something positive. In the past, it's certainly...
But if I were you, I would ring her constituency office and just ask whether you can have, because I don't know whether she's doing a surgery at the moment, but she might not be because of COVID, but you might want to suggest that if you could just have 2 minutes on the phone, you'd be very grateful.
1 month to have a chat.
Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you.
Very good.
There's a woman over there.
Yeah, we'll prioritise. We'll go for gender.
Well, I mean, there are loads of women over, but I mean, there's one who wants to ask a question.
I'll make it very brief. Have you got other interests that you've dealt with, say, it's Conservative MPs about, where you want to mention this to the people, not part of their constituency? Is there a pertinence in doing that if it's just dropping a quick line to say, this relates to... Can I use names? I won't.
Yeah, go on.
Tobias Elwood about military, Robert Halfman about higher education and universities. Would you mind taking a look at it? Is that okay?
So I think I call him Toby. I don't normally do it like that, but I mean, I call him Toby. But I was thinking of Sweeney Todd because the boy's called Toby in it. But it's irrelevant. Tobias Elwood, I think, I might be wrong, but I think he signed our letter to the Prime Minister on this. So I think he might be on board. And if he hasn't, he should.
And I'd be surprised if Robert Halfman wasn't either.
Robert, I'm sure, is being supported, but I haven't actually collared him. Sorry, collard's a bad term. Sounds like sort of thrust him up against the wall, which isn't my aim. But on the whole, he's been very helpful. I think he's.
Okay to drop brief.
Yeah, definitely, definitely.
So not, it's obviously bad to say constituent when you're not. So just
Well, and even if you wrote a handwritten postcard to them, it wouldn't do any harm. Yeah. Sorry, Andrew.
No, this is great.
Yeah, thanks, Chris, for the talk. I was wondering, on the 3rd of December, is there a minimum number of MPs that need to back the bill before it proceeds?
More than the people who don't. First rule of politics is turn up. Second rule of politics is don't call the vote until you know you're going to win. Third is stay until the vote. Friday business is always a bit different from normal business, because if you get to 2:30 and you're still talking, then you've lost, as it were. It's talked out. As I said, I'm number 2. The government, if they wanted to, it'd be a bit naughty of them, but they could decide to fill some of the time on a Friday morning with making a statement about something completely irrelevant. It'd be pretty naughty, but they did it 2 weeks ago on a Friday morning. If we want a closure motion, then you have to have had enough debate, and you've got to win the closure motion. So we need quite a number of MPs. But in truth, I don't think the government has yet decided on my bill. I want to shame them into supporting it, and we might yet win that without then even needing a vote.
Great. We've got time for one more question, and it's my friend Byron back there.
Just wondering, like you say about the bill and the strategy, and for me that all makes perfect sense, partly because I have brain surgery multiple times. But what would be the argument against that, so that we can know how to angle it? Why would somebody have the confidence to say, not interested, sorry?
Well, there's 2 elements to this. Obviously, a government has an element of collective responsibility, so they will. I think it's Sajid Javid who is making the decision on whether or not the government's supporting the bill, though you could argue it shouldn't be, which is why we're writing to the Prime Minister, because we want a strategy for the whole of government, not just for the Department for Health and Social Care. Sajid said to me, I want to have a strategy, but I don't want legislation to force me to have a strategy. And I said, well, but then you won't end up having a strategy. You'll just keep on saying you're going to have a strategy, but you just won't have a strategy. And you won't be able to force other departments to participate, because it won't be a statutory legal requirement for them to do so. And he said, well, so what I've got to do is prove to you that we don't need it in law. And I said, yeah, sure. If you announced in the House of Commons any day of the week, made a statement and said, we are going to have a strategy, I'm going to appoint such and such a person to chair it, and it's going to be taking evidence for the next 6 months, and we will publish next, blah, blah, then fine. Then we've got a strategy. I want a strategy more than I want a bill. But my fear is you won't even do that. You'll just say, honestly, Chris, just leave, we're getting on with it. And I go, well, but you're not, because you haven't got a strategy. And so we've got to force you to have a strategy, and that's why the strategy is to have a strategy through the bill, strategically.
Well,
We finished?
I mean, Chris, having time with you like this to just understand the complexities of the shenanigans in the House is gold. I think we've all learnt something this morning, which is the aim of this conference, this summit. And somebody asked me on Twitter, or asked the Society on Twitter, what's the difference between a conference and a summit? And I was thinking about how through this last 2 years we've been slowly climbing, and we're at a peak on the journey. There'll be more summits ahead, I think, is what you've conveyed to us. And we really wish you well with your work over these coming weeks. I can't thank you enough for your work on this. I think all of our brain injury survivors that we all represent here are behind you. Why wouldn't we be? I think that's a great question, Byron, to think, how do we tackle the arguments? What a terrific session. Thank you so much.
Don't be too nice, because you'll just make my eyes moist. Well done. Right, Jacob Rees-Mogg.
Need 2 masks for that.
Okay, well, that's great. Chris, thanks ever so much. We do understand you need to scoot away, and we're going to press on with the next part of the day. You know, you can't go too far at the moment in the press without coming